Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 155 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle. I'm down here in the bunker at Vomitorium. We're South. I can never get my cardinal points right. Vomitorium South. I'm here. It's an early morning for us, which is very rare.
You know why you can't get your directions right?
Why is that right?
You never went through orientation.
Oh, man. Out of the box, even this early. That's not bad. Not bad.
All right.
But I'm down here with my good friend and co-host, Dr. David Noe. How you feeling, Dave?
This is early morning, Jeff.
It is.
You are the morning owl, whatever that is.
I know, but
so if there's a night owl, what's the morning animal?
I guess it's the early bird.
The early bird,
right? But nobody knows which bird.
I don't know, but I'm typically lucubrating, and you're the early bird. So did you get the worm this morning?
I did not.
Okay.
I thought when we had talked about finding time to record this, and
right.
so we can do an early morning. I thought that's going to be fine.
Yeah.
For me,
right.
But for whatever reason, did not sleep well last night. And I'm having I hope this doesn't show that I'm having a rough time getting going. Yeah, we shall see. Yeah.
So you're feeling okay?
I'm doing okay.
All right.
I'm doing all right. Yeah. But how about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well. We have some low humidity, a stretch of that going through here in Michigan. It's
very
beautiful
nice.
This morning. I always tell people that there are 2 months in Michigan that are just glorious, that make it worth the rest of the year, going through the rest of the year. And that would be June and maybe October.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Low humidity, blue skies, perfect temperatures, crisp air.
Yeah.
But now we get some of it in July, so that's a bonus.
Yep. So you're enjoying the low humidity.
Yes, I am.
Anything else going on with you today?
Let's see. We got a book coming out next week.
You do?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. John Arrowsmith, Puritan Divine, my translation of his work, Tactica Sacra. So that's, we gave it the title, Plans for Holy War.
Okay.
If people buy it under false pretenses, we're okay with that.
Right. Now, is it one of those things where it was a good, satisfying project, but at this point, you say, I just want it out of my hands?
That's what it is.
Yeah.
I am so eager to finally see the final product so I can just wash my hands of it completely.
Right. Yeah, right.
Because it's a long time in coming.
Yes.
And so it's supposed to appear next Friday. So
wow.
Maybe we'll do a couple shows on it or something, because there's a ton of Greek and Latin in it.
That sounds great.
I'm excited about that.
And I have to ask, do you already have the next project in the works?
Yes. Well, the next project is also at the proofreader and the typesetter.
Oh, goodness.
So there's 2 coming out this year, but it's it's a collaborative work with the editor Chad B. Van Dixhorn, and it's been many years in the making also.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a coincidence that these 2 major things are coming out this year.
And, But and on the horizon, do you have another translation project
yes,
in the works?
I have several, but they're not finished.
Yeah.
So we got to get through this podcast, and I got to get home and
get back to work.
Start doing some translating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But one of my avocations here, if I may, for just a moment.
Please do.
And probably the listener can guess where this is going. So I've been reading some physics lately.
Really?
I've been interested in some physics.
Okay.
And I've been interested in one, Alfred Bernhard Nobel.
Oh, yeah.
He was born in October 1833, so Wikipedia tells me. He died in December 1896, a chemist, inventor, engineer, and businessman. He is known for inventing
dynamite, right?
Yes. As well as having bequeathed his fortune to establish the Nobel Prize. That's the first time I've heard Wikipedia use bequeath.
Yeah.
Since I'm cribbing from their website.
Yes.
A member of the prominent Nobel family, Nobel displayed an early aptitude for science and learning, particularly in chemistry and languages. He became fluent in 6 languages.
Wow.
And filed his first patent at the age of 24.
That's incredible.
Yeah. How old were you, Jeff, when you filed your first patent?
All my patents are still pending.
Still pending.
Yeah.
Okay. Me too. It goes on. He embarked on many business ventures with his family, most notably owning the company Bofors, which was an iron and steel producer that he had developed into a major manufacturer of cannons and other armaments. Nobel's most famous invention, dynamite, was an explosive using nitroglycerin that was patented in 1867.
Yes.
But what I came across, which was really interesting, was that his mother, Carolina Andriette Nobel, the mother of the famous scientist, was actually very fond of Alfred. She loved him dearly. She used to say things like, he's got a smile that seems to me to remind me of childhood memories when everything was as fresh and as bright as the bright blue sky.
Yes.
Now and then when she would see his face, it would take her away to a special place, and if she stared too long, she'd probably break down and cry. And I guess Alfred was a handsome man, too. Did you know this?
I had no idea.
He had eyes of the bluest skies, as if they thought of rain. His mother wasn't sure she would hate to look into those eyes and see even an ounce of pain. His hair, I guess he had a nice head of hair, too. So his mom would say that his hair reminds her of a warm, safe place where as a child she'd hide and pray for the thunder and the rain to quietly pass her by. Yeah, can you believe that?
I can't believe that.
Do you know where Alfred Nobel was from?
Where was that?
You don't know?
I don't know. He was from Sweden?
Yeah, so I think that his mother might say that he was her Swede child of mine.
As you started to go through the lyrics, of course, I'm thinking, okay, what's the punchline? I couldn't get it though, and
there's a reason.
Okay,
this is stupid. That's why this is a stupid gag.
Oh, I loved it. I think that's what I needed at this early hour.
Something ridiculous.
I have to tell you,
prime the pump of creativity.
Right. And yesterday, as I was driving around, I was thinking about, okay, when my turn comes up, what's the next thing? And that song actually crossed my mind. Oh, really?
And I got it.
You got it.
I snuck in. I don't know, Jeff. After working, again, canceling all my appointments yesterday, working on this for 12, 13 hours, maybe it's time to retire this gag.
Have we reached its limits?
I kind of wonder.
Right.
I was trying to, what's the name? Is it Golding who wrote that novel about the boys trapped on the island?
Oh, the Lord of the Flies. Right?
That's correct.
Yes.
So I spent a lot of time on that one, and Lard of the Flies was something about bacon and unwanted insects.
You call it like Lord of the Fries.
I tried that too.
Yeah, right.
Nothing. And I turned to Jane Austen.
Yes.
Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice. Boy, I was just scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Wow. And what I find is when my mind gets on that track, then I just set aside all the other stuff I should be doing.
Yes.
And I become obsessed with finding the perfect pun.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe it is time to set this.
Well,
I don't say retire. Maybe set it aside.
Oh, set it aside and let the juices revamp or something.
Right.
Well, you can give it a try, but I think I may be reaching the end of
it.
Yeah. The creativity that I can spend on this particular thing, because some of them, I'll just be honest, I was pleased with.
Yes.
Tale of Two Kitties.
Right.
But this tapped out.
Right.
So what are we talking about today? Do we have a shout out? What does this have to do with the classics, etc.?
Right. No shout out today, I believe. But we are covering. We're going to talk about the second half of this chapter from. Oh, I'm going to butcher his name. It was Carl Richard. Richard, right. And the name of the book is
The Golden Age of the Classics in America.
Right. And so our last episode, we got a little ways into the chapter.
Right.
And talking about the kind of the broad influence that the classics had on early America in the 18th and 19th centuries. And we started to talk about the different classes and strata of society that the classics found, and kind of popped that. I think that balloon of assumption that I often hear that the classics were just for the elite,
right?
And just for the upper class, founding fathers and such. But in fact, it was a much wider reach than I think is usually supposed.
Yes, nice summary, well put. So this book came out in 2009. And Professor Richard, historian, PhD from Vanderbilt in 1988. We covered one of his other books on a previous episode somewhere back in the 40s.
That's right.
That was a Patriotic Day sort of themed episode on the Founding Fathers and the Classics. And this first chapter here in the Golden Age of the Classics in America is classical conditioning, which has nothing to do with Garnier Fructus, school, home, and society. And the listener will remember that in the previous episode on this subject, we were talking about how Richard is making the argument that some of the other scholars who work in this field have cast the founding generation as those who were the most intent upon the study and appropriation of the classics. And they have sort of described a narrative of decline, that since that time, American interest broadly in the classics has waned.
Yes.
And Richard is taking an opposite approach, saying that it was right in the antebellum period that classics fully bloomed.
Yes.
So there's actually an uptick.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's part of the thesis he's defending in this book.
Right. So as far as an opening quote goes,
yes.
I was looking. I thought that the very last paragraph in this chapter would work well for an opening quote.
You want to go all the way to the end there,
Yes.
and then maybe come back.
And so I thought, and it would also kind of encourage us, you and I, to actually
get to the end of the chapter.
Attempt to get to the end of the chapter, right?
All right, let's hear that final paragraph here. What is this, page 40?
This is page 40, yes.
Okay.
And Richard writes, the classics not only maintained their dominance over the American educational system throughout the antebellum period, but also spread their profound influence beyond previous confines to new regions and economic classes, as well as to women and African Americans. Although other subjects, such as modern languages, modern history, science, and economics, were added to college curricula, Greek and Latin were still regarded as the core of a sound education in grammar schools, academies, and colleges. Perhaps more important, the sights and sounds of even small frontier towns, the names, the buildings, the art, and the speeches, all served to reinforce the popular notion that the United States was the chief heir to the ideals of Greece and Rome, a classical republic reborn. Which extends what you were just saying,
Right.
About not this narrative decline from the very beginning, but the dominance of classical learning, at least here through the better part of the 19th century.
That's right. Yep. Up until the Civil War, and then thereafter as well. So as we resume, we get back into it. Let's go to page 5, maybe, Jeff. What do you think about that?
Let's do it.
And this section is entitled by Richard, Colleges and Universities.
Yes.
He begins by saying, quote, entrance requirements at antebellum American colleges and universities differed a little from the requirements of colonial colleges. When John Winthrop, so there's a founder, a very famous founder, when John Winthrop's nephew, George Downing, another George,
so many Georges,
applied to Harvard in the mid-17th century, he was required to, quote, understand Tully, obviously Cicero, Virgil, or any such classical authors, and readily to speak or write true Latin in prose, and have skill in making Latin verse, and be completely grounded in the Greek language. In 1816, when Horace Mann applied for entrance to Brown University, he faced remarkably similar requirements. The ability to, quote, read accurately, construe, and parse Tully and the Greek Testament and Virgil, to write true Latin in prose, and to know the rules of prosody. Colleges were interested in a candidate's ability to read Latin and Greek, and little else.
That's amazing.
Yes, Jeff, what were the entrance requirements for you getting into the institution of your undergraduate days?
I had a pulse.
Okay.
and little else. That's nothing requiring me to display proficiency in Greek or Latin.
Right.
I had 2 years of Latin in high school.
Oh, that's impressive.
Right. And I knew coming into undergraduate that I was, going to fulfill my language requirement by rounding that out. But I had no immediate plans when I started college that I was going to pursue the classics
right.
specifically.
Right.
Now, what about you?
Well, as I remember college entrance requirements, everyone had to have finished high school.
Yes.
And the requirements vary state by state, although actually not even to have finished. I had a very good friend who matriculated at our alma mater, dropped out of high school.
Oh, really?
Yes. But he was a brilliant guy, still is. Really, really high marks on standardized tests, which is the second element.
Yeah.
Somehow he enrolled at this institution and then worked on his, what is that called? The graduate GED, the graduate equivalency degree.
Oh, right. To
get a
take
high
care
school
of
diploma.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's not really necessary.
Right.
In some instances.
Interesting.
But no specific academic requirements. That's what strikes me about this, that the academic requirements are specific to a subject and even a certain level of proficiency in a subject.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a requirement if you want to enroll in a specific degree at the institution.
Right.
You spend the first couple years to get into a nursing program. you have to get a certain math score, calculus if you want to take engineering or, chemistry, something like that.
Right.
But that's only after admission.
Yes.
I think it's a completely open field just to get into the institution.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's listed here, it reminds me more of maybe similar to getting into a graduate school.
Or even getting out of graduate school.
Right, getting out, right. Yeah, no doubt.
And honestly, for as much as I have studied and enjoyed Latin, the ability to compose Latin verse is something to which I still aspire.
Yeah.
And these folks had to do it, these young men and women had to do it to get into college.
It's incredible, right? Yeah, two things struck me just in that paragraph that you just read is one is Tully. Right.
Okay.
Cicero is, I think he's at least the only one that shows up that gets kind of a little nickname.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, later on in the chapter, Richard talks about the centrality of Cicero.
Yes.
To the thinking of a lot of these early Americans. But I love that Cicero gets just kind of that very familiar.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Like he's your he's in your posse.
That's right.
Right. And then secondly,
you trying to use lingo here?
I'm
very early in the
I'm trying
morning.
to stay hip with the kids.
Okay.
And the second one was about the Latin and composition,
right?
And I was thinking about even through my undergraduate and graduate work, I never had a course in composition. I think you did.
I did.
You?
Yes,
Yeah.
I had an excellent course in Latin composition. Jack Holtzmark of Tarzan fame.
Oh yeah. He taught that.
He did.
Okay,
and it was fantastic. And maybe I can encourage the listeners out there who are studying Latin. I don't think I've told this story before. The first assignment we had to translate the phrase during the reign of Numa, right? Numa, the second king of Rome following Romulus. So I sat down to translate during the reign of Numa. That was the opening phrase.
Yes.
So guess what I did?
What'd you do?
Looked in my English-Latin dictionary for the word during.
Yes.
Inter. Then for the word reign, regnum. And then I put Numa in the genitive. Inter regnum numai.
Yes.
And I thought, well, that's good. That's good. I show up for class with the other aspiring Latin compositionists. And I was called on to put my translation on the board so we could all analyze it,
Yes.
And I put it up there. And Jack Holtzmark, such a, may he rest in peace, fantastic teacher. He didn't come out and say, come on, this is ridiculous. He was kind. He said, okay, well, let's take a look at this here and see what's good about it. And you got your preposition good, and you got the accusative regnum, which is the case inter takes. That's good. And numa here in the genitive. Okay. And then he just took it apart, because it was totally wrong. For this reason, inter distinguishes between things. It doesn't mean a time within, typically, at least in the classical era.
Yeah.
So interregnum and what, right? And so he said, maybe if we did it like this, 2 words, numa in the ablative, rege in the ablative. So now you have an ablative absolute.
So while Numa was reigning.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And while he was reigning, when he was king, rege, numa rege.
Yeah.
Perfect. And exactly how you would do it in Latin, right?
Yeah.
And never forgotten both the superior Latinity that he taught me, but also the lesson about how to be a more gentle and capable teacher.
Yes.
He's always displaying stuff and then asking the student, what do you think about this?
Right.
Rather than just dictating, he would say, what is your response to this?
Yeah.
And
that's great.
That made it memorable.
That's really great.
So that's what these kids were learning to get into college. I learned it in grad school.
Yes.
So
that's incredible, right? Yeah. And as I said in my own course of study, I never touched it. It wasn't even an option.
That's really too bad.
It is too bad because I think that I'm probably for you too. It doing that exercise from that kind of from the other way.
There's nothing like it,
right? It really you learn the language in a way that you can't just simply by translating.
Well, I have a potential analog. I'd like to hear your feedback on. You're quite an accomplished musician, so when you hear a blues song, a jazz song, or something like that, a pop song. The level of appreciation that you have for the composition, the rhythm, the melody, the harmony, all of that, I'm sure that increases tremendously were you to sit down and try to write something like it.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Right.
And then you can see this is how the process took place.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, and I think in that example, you get really appreciation for, in at some point, kind of the mysteriousness of it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And just the the inspiration behind these things, that you can't strip it down to kind of a mathematics, right?
Or maybe another one. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but here's another analogy that occurs to me. We were both big fans of track and field, right? And the Olympics coming up,
right?
So if we're watching this on television and we see the person who in the like the men's 200 meter, they come in at 19.97.
Yeah.
Right. But the one who wins the event comes in at 19.42 or something like that.
Yeah.
So the person at 19.97, what a slowpoke.
right. Yeah.
But if we could be there in person and watch them running past us, or even better, we could run the race against them. Right?
Yeah.
Then you get a real sense, when you try to do it, in other words, of just the extraordinary accomplishment.
Exactly.
So my fastest time in the 200 meters is about 10 meters. And then I just have to sit down.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, no, that's excellent. I like that visual.
Okay, so as the chapter goes on here, what were the entrance requirements like, Jeff, at other places? Was it only the prestigious universities, in other words, the Ivies, that required these high philological standards?
No, and I find this really interesting about, I think we talked a little bit about this last time about how when Richard kind of compares these different curricula from these different colleges, there's certainly overlap on certain authors,
right?
But a lot of them just they kind of bring in authors which, to my mind, today would be considered kind of more on the margins of the classical canon. So that comes up in this paragraph. So Richard writes, these entrance requirements were not restricted to the prestigious universities of what is now the Ivy League. From the colonial period to the Civil War, the number of American colleges increased from 9 to 182.
That's an explosion.
It is.
The bar was low for founding a college, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. And nearly all the new colleges required entering students to demonstrate proficiency in the classical languages. Davidson College in North Carolina required a mastery of Latin and Greek grammar and of ancient geography for entrance into the college. Entering students were expected to demonstrate a close familiarity with Caesar, Sallust, Cicero's orations against Catiline.
There are 4, right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Virgil's Bucolics, Georgics, and Aeneid, and Xenophon's Anabasis. Emory and Henry College in Virginia, they made a knowledge of ancient history, Virgil, Cicero, and the Greek language. Sharon College in Mississippi insisted on knowledge of Latin, including the works of Caesar, Ovid, Virgil, and Sallust. The University of Alabama required the ability to commence the reading of the higher Latin and Greek authors.
So that's nice. Yes. Because, thank you. That's nice because Alabama only required the ability to commence the reading.
Yeah.
You didn't actually have to have done it completely.
Right.
Or to know them well, but just the ability to make a start on the higher authors.
Yes.
So that's remarkable.
Right. So I think we find in this, there's in the founding of these colleges, there's a broad agreement that the classical languages and the works of the classical authors they're foundational.
Yes.
This is where you begin, or where you should have began years before you go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And on the next page 6, I mean, we're not going to read every sentence, although I'm tempted because this is an excellent book, and I think it's available as a paperback reprint.
Yeah.
That once you got into one of those colleges, you continued your study at a high level. Quote, during the antebellum period, Yale required Greek and Latin each of the 4 years. So you never were done with it.
Yes.
Freshmen at Dickinson College in Pennsylvania read Sallust, Horace, Xenophon. Sophomores read Cicero, Horace, Xenophon, and Euripides. Juniors read Sophocles, Euripides, Cicero a third time, right? Juvenal and Persius. And seniors read Aeschylus, Tacitus, and Terence. Now, that's an interesting pairing because I think there's general agreement that Aeschylus and Tacitus are, for Greek and Latin respectively, some of the most challenging authors.
Without a doubt.
As well as, in some ways, the most rewarding. But Terence is not an especially difficult author. So for him to occur in the 4th year is interesting to me. And there's only 6 plays of Terence that survive, whereas there's a lot of Tacitus.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't think maybe much time was given to Terence in that 4th year.
Right.
New courses were added too. Alfred Nobel would have gotten in on this.
Yeah.
Chemistry, geography, English grammar, surveying, navigation, modern languages, and electives. Harvard, Yale, and Dartmouth Wesleyan required these new things, right? These were new courses, but you had to continue taking classics.
Yes. Yeah. Would you read? I love this the quote or the sentence which the paragraph ends with. As these colleges are starting to kind of add things. And maybe,
I love this.
maybe threatening perhaps the place of the classics.
Yes.
Right.
And you have to remember, what year was this? This was in the 1840s, 1830s.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll read that. So he says, quote, Jeremiah Day, the president of Yale. Now, I don't have all my Yale presidents memorized, but he's a pretty early one. Jeremiah Day, the president of Yale, typified the low regard for non-classical subjects when, in response to Yale's decision to offer a non-credit course in the ancient Anglo-Saxon language, he sighed, quote, it might soon be necessary to appoint an instructor in whittling.
I loved that.
Yeah, he just threw Anglo-Saxon under the bus.
He
right?
did, big time.
It's about as serious as whittling. Let's appoint an instructor in whittling.
Yeah.
Did you have a minor in whittling?
I abandoned it. Yeah. So
too many shavings in your shoes.
Too many shavings and kind of disappointing results.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
It's supposed to look like a flute, but
no, it's
more like a baseball bat.
Yeah, exactly. It just looked like another kind of shaved stick.
Right.
Yeah.
But how does one make an argument, though, Jeff? Here's a question for you. We live in a time in which, o tempora, o mores,
yes,
people generally believe that everything is equal. I don't mean people, but interests and subjects. So while as a kid I loved to whittle, and, some people are obviously better whittlers than others, if I were to say, look, the ability to whittle is nothing like the ability to compose a symphony or a concerto, or playing the kazoo, as nice as it can sound in like a Clapton song or something.
Yeah.
Clapton has a nice kazoo in one of his compositions.
Yes.
Playing the kazoo is not an accomplishment on a par with playing the violin or the saxophone.
Right.
But people don't like, it seems to me, any kind of evaluative judgments.
Right.
Even the ones that are the most obvious.
Right.
So how do you even begin to make an argument? Okay, whittling is nice.
Yes.
Or the history of hoop sports.
Yes.
I'm getting dangerously close to rhythmic gymnastics. But those should not be subjects for undergrads to take. They should be studying Greek and Latin because it's inherently better.
Right.
How can you even make an argument like that?
It's hard. It's very difficult. I mean, the two things that come to mind is one of my favorite quotes from G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah.
Is when you come across a fence in the middle of the woods, don't tear it down, but first find out why the fence is there to begin with, right? And so
what does he mean by that?
I think he means like don't just tear something down because it's old.
I see.
And I think Chesterton's saying is that not necessarily every tradition is worthwhile,
right?
But because it's a tradition, should give you pause.
I see.
Right. And so when I have had these conversations with students, and it veers into that territory, I often find myself kind of going to kind of the evidence of influence, right? Why do these things survive? Why have they survived? And the fact that they have survived for so long should give us pause,
right?
And that's, I mean, you're not just simply jumping to the idea that because it's ancient, it's good, but looking at kind of at the track of influence. And I think one of the things that I try to instill in my students in, say, a mythology course, is the way in which these ideas and narratives still. They show up in our culture,
right?
But they often show up kind of unexpectedly in a way where maybe 100, 200 years ago, it was kind of obvious you saw the kind of the chain of influence. And so it's still there, but we've kind of gotten off the track. Let me throw the question back to you.
Yeah. Well, I think what you have articulated sounds quite good, that is a good way to approach it. Another way to approach that is to use the reply that Stanley Fish, a Pomo philosopher, Stanley Fish, who used to be at the University of Chicago. So I read one of his books, 7-8 years ago, Save the World on Your Own Time.
Yeah.
An excellent book.
Great title.
Yeah. We should talk about it at greater length someday, but in the introduction to that book, or the prologue, he recounts a conversation in which, when he was dean of the School of Arts and Humanities at Chicago, some potential undergrad and his or her parents were touring the campus, and he bumped into them. I think this is how it went, but someone can check if they want the real specifics. And the parents asked him something along the lines of, so why does my kid have to take all of these courses in the humanities and the liberal arts? You know, he or she wants to be a doctor or an engineer. Can't they go directly to that? What use are those studies?
Yes.
And Fish said something along the lines of, well, do you know anything about those particular studies? Have you ever taken a philosophy course? Can you speak German? Have you studied French? The answer was no. And his reply, I guess he was a great recruiter, was, until you know something about those subjects, you have no business talking about them.
Yeah.
So go learn them and get back to me.
I love it. Yeah.
And so, you know, it's kind of a sharp retort, but I think what he's trying to say is you can't possibly evaluate adequately things of which you are completely ignorant.
Yes.
Right? So how does one know that the kazoo is superior to the violin if you've never played the violin?
Right.
Wouldn't you have to experience both things in order to make a value judgment of some kind?
Yeah.
So I could master the kazoo in, a day, perhaps.
Yes.
But people work for decades to master other kinds of instruments.
Indeed.
And so you just have to have knowledge in order to make the comparison.
Yeah. No, it reminds me too. I think there, and so kind of the Fish's example is on the side of people who would just readily dismiss like the liberal arts and the humanities.
Correct.
But I think on even from the side of defending the liberal arts, what I find today is, I get this in talking to kind of people of my parents' generation, and things like this, where they, without going into the details, there's another local college that kind of decimated their humanities program fairly recently.
Yes.
And I remember talking to my parents and some people from their generation, and they were lamenting about kind of the death of the liberal arts, that nobody kind of values these things anymore.
Right.
But I think I heard kind of behind their complaint is that I think there is a segment of society that kind of says, well, of course the liberal arts are valuable,
right,
but maybe when pressed, couldn't really tell you why.
Oh, definitely
right?
Not. Sure. Yeah, you encounter that all the time.
All the time, right.
So I'm glad that there's the fumes at least.
Yeah,
remaining.
right.
But that's it.
Yes.
So, lest we get too far afield, maybe just this question: whose fault is it then?
Who killed Homer?
Yeah,
that's another book, right? Yeah.
Whose fault is it that people have a general appreciation for the liberal arts but no precise idea why?
Yeah.
I think you have to lay that at the feet of the practitioners, at least in part.
Yes, exactly. Which was the thesis of that book, Who
Yes,
Killed Homer,
exactly.
Right?
So going on page 6.
Yeah.
Even at the new colleges on the northwestern frontier, says Richard, the classics were king. So you would expect that maybe in the seacoast, the cities along the seaboard, places like Boston and other cities along, maybe Baltimore, things like that had been more established, been around longer, more prosperity, that the classics would be pursued there as a leisure activity and so spill over into education.
Yes.
But Richard says even on the wild frontier, the places where, Abraham Lincoln was growing up and such, they were still studying these things.
Yes.
Could you read a little bit about that, where we begin with, therefore, Allegheny College?
Sure. Therefore, Allegheny College embedded some mortar from Virgil's tomb along with a piece of Plymouth Rock. I love this. I love that kind of detail.
I knew you'd like it. We'll get to the end of the sentence.
Sorry.
Of this.
All right. Embedded some mortar from Virgil's tomb along with a piece of Plymouth Rock in its cornerstone, and introduced the customary Latin orations at its first commencement. Ohio University emphasized the Greek New Testament, Xenophon, Herodotus, Homer, Greek tragedies and orations, Sallust, Livy, Horace, Cicero, Virgil, Tacitus, and Juvenal. And then closer to home here, the University of Michigan and the University of Wisconsin was also focused on classical instruction. In 1852, the University of Michigan boasted that its courses emphasized a constant comparison between the ancient and modern world.
The constant comparison. That's interesting.
Yes.
Because I'm sure that was modern at the time, actually. That's cutting edge, right? These other schools were largely, I understand, studying the classics as something, what is it? Is it ars artis gratia, art for the sake of art?
Yes.
But Michigan's doing something innovative.
Right.
Not just studying antiquity, but now comparing it to modern society.
Right. And I think Richard suggests in this chapter is that there does, maybe not a shift from one thing to the other, but in addition, there is a move from studying languages and literature for their own sake and how it can kind of center the individual, and going towards kind of this idea of kind of America as Rome.
Yes.
Not in as you often hear today.
As the Roman Republic, not the empire.
Not the empire, right, exactly. Not as you often, if you hear that argument today, it's often like, are we in the last days here as we are in Rome? Yeah. But more as kind of reading very optimistically America against kind of the ideals of Athenian democracy in the Roman Republic.
Right.
Yeah.
So moving on from there, Richard takes up the subject of the military colleges. And Robert E. Lee, the hero of the South, applied to West Point in 1824. When he did so, he asked his instructor to write a letter of recommendation to the Secretary of War, John C. Calhoun. And this is page 8, quote, aware that military cadets were expected to exhibit classical knowledge, Leary wrote regarding Lee, quote, with me he has read all the minor classics, in addition to Homer and Longinus on the Sublime, Tacitus and Cicero. He is well versed in arithmetic, algebra, and Euclid. In regard to what he has read with me, I am certain that when examined, he will neither disappoint me or his friends. And then when he became a president of Washington College after the Civil War, which is now, I think, Washington and Lee College.
Where is that?
Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. Robert E. Lee would personally examine students in Greek. The president of the college is examining students in Greek, in order for them to get into the institution and to succeed.
Yeah.
And the female colleges established during the antebellum period, it says Richard, provided classical training as well. And then there's a whole list of schools, including Troy Female Seminary. Emma Willard, the founder of that school, quote, enrolled 12,000 students in its first 15 years, and they sought to offer a classical education comparable to that received by college men. So it was extremely widespread.
Yes.
On the frontier, on the seaboard, for men's colleges and women's colleges, African Americans, low class, high class. It was kind of a universal cultural phenomenon.
Right. And I thought this also, I think Richard's evidence also kind of argues against the fact that not only was classical learning not just for the kind of the elite men, but it wasn't also kind of located in just the Northeast, right? I think even some of the cruder stereotypes about the American South, right? So North educated, South uneducated, right? Here he has lots of evidence that
down there it's all Mountain Dew and pork rinds.
Exactly right. I mean, but that we were just talking about the University of Alabama. Here we're talking about Robert E. Lee. Classical learning kind of found its way in all corners of early American society.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you got the bottom of page 9 there. The first female physician in North Carolina, Susan Dimick.
Yeah.
Can you read a little bit of that?
Sure. Latin was the favorite subject of Susan Dimick, who became North Carolina's first female physician after the Civil War. By the 1850s, many schools shared the view of the Richmond Female Institute that the, quote, the fairer sex ought to enjoy advantages for liberal culture equal in grade to that afforded the other. Yeah. So they're
across the board.
Across the board, yeah.
Right. Well, I think as we're coming up to the break here, perhaps we should launch into the New Hellenism.
Yes.
Page 11. Should we do that after the break?
We should do that at the break. I wanted to just touch upon two things that struck me from just before this.
Okay, so go ahead. Why don't we cover that right now?
I think my one quibble with Richard, I should say,
okay.
I love this book.
Yes.
He's a fine writer. But it's, unless you have kind of the chronologies and personae of the 19th century America, unless you have them kind of embedded in your mind, it's hard to kind of to tell kind of where he's taking it from. So the chronology jumps around, and so
do you need like a timeline?
I would love it. I should have a timeline open there, and so he mentions President James Garfield, who I believe was he had a very short presidency. He was assassinated in 1881, I believe.
Is that the guy who ate so much lasagna?
No, what? Did he? I don't know this story.
No, that's the cartoon.
Sorry.
The cartoon character Garfield,
of course,
loved lasagna.
Sorry, I didn't see where that was going.
That's all right.
But Garfield was a Latin teacher, right? And it made me think. Wonder, is he the only U.S. president that was? I mean, all of these people we would consider them trained classicists, given their education. But in terms of becoming a professional classicist as a Latin teacher, is Garfield the only one?
That I can remember, but I'm sure there's a corrigendum coming up here.
Right. Yeah, send it in. But I remember it's not in Richard's book, but I remember a detail from some other source I heard about Garfield is that he had this incredible ability to write with both hands at the same time.
Latin with one hand
and Greek with the other.
That's right.
Do you think that's true?
Probably. Right. Interestingly, I was talking about this with somebody just last night.
Oh, you were?
Yes.
Well, how did that come up?
Well, I don't remember, but it's a psychiatrist friend of mine. So it was the conversation with things that have to do with the brain, right? That was the audio daily double, and so I think he could do it. But the question is, what did he write?
Yes.
So if you ask me to write, the first words of the Iliad and the first words of Cicero's speech against Catiline, I could probably scratch it out.
Yes.
Right. But in terms of composing anything beautiful and original,
right,
that's a completely different animal.
Exactly. And doing it by both hands simultaneously.
Yeah, maybe I could do that. I don't know. But
wow, yeah.
Stupid mind tricks. Right.
And the other thing that struck me too is he talks about, before we get to the next section, about in a lot of these curricula there was competitions.
Oh, yes.
And people could kind of publicly display their erudition.
Another thing that has really no... I don't know. It doesn't really have any purchase today.
Right.
Maybe. There are still spelling bees.
Yeah.
There's Jeopardy. There's Wheel of Fortune. I don't know if Family Feud counts, but...
Family Feud. Yeah, maybe just a little bit.
Okay.
Right. But he talks about how at commencements ceremonies were often, the best student in Latin or Greek could come up and give an oration and display their skill.
Harvard still does that. Its annual Latin oration. Some of them are phenomenal. Yeah. One about a decade ago was by a Michigander, acquaintance of mine, Charlie McNamara. He gave the Latin oration. Folks should look it up on YouTube. He gave the Latin oration for Harvard's commencement. Brilliant guy.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think he went on to Columbia, was where he was studying classics.
Interesting.
So
it reminded me of a movie, a good movie, not a great movie, called The Emperor's Club. Did you ever see this?
No.
It came out in 2002. And
so is this like Dead Poets Society?
It's kind of in that vein, but not as syrupy.
Right.
It stars Kevin Kline. And it takes place in the 1970s, and Kevin Kline plays a kind of like an old school classics teacher. And I don't remember much about the movie, but I do remember that one of the plot points centers around this annual competition where in this boys' school, someone was crowned Mr. Julius Caesar.
Oh.
And you do that by displaying your deep knowledge of all things ancient Greco-Roman.
Nice.
So I thought that was kind of... So it takes place in the 1970s, and so I thought that kind of reminds me of kind of a throwback.
There you go.
Yeah.
And speaking of Mr. Julius Caesar,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
Right. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good folks at Hackett Publishing. These guys have been with us since the very beginning. We're coming up on 4 years.
Coming up on 4 years.
Incredible.
That's right.
And they just do such good work. A lot of what we're trying to do with this podcast is keep the classics alive and bring it to a wide audience, and not just for those stuffy 18th century Northeasterners, right? And Hackett is one of these companies that's doing this. They offer a wide variety of titles, not just the classics, but from all corners of history, academia, philosophy, literature, language, religion. And it's affordable.
That's right.
One of the things I love as a professor who has assigns books that students are required to purchase is that Hackett offers these things at a very affordable price, but at a high quality of what you're going to find between the covers.
Yes. So I'm looking at the web page right here of Hackett, which is a nicely done web page. I think it's quite professional. And we have 3 titles here on the mast. I think they call that the top part. Readings in Chinese Philosophy, 3rd edition. Then Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling. And then Ovid's Heroides, a new translation by Stanley Lombardo and Melina McClure. So Stan, of course, big fan of his.
Yep.
Then if you scroll down a little bit under New and Forthcoming, you're going to love this. Aristophanes' Lysistrata. The Thesmophoria Zeusai.
This is coming out soon?
That's right, which they call just Thesmo. Nice. Because who can say Thesmophoria Zeusai?
It's a tongue twister.
Yes, and the frogs. Then Expanding Horizons, Duns Scotus, Treatise on the First Principle, Aeschylus' Persians, Congressional Deliberation, major themes, I think it says, speeches and writing, major debates, speeches and writings, Aristotle's Dialectic, the creative argument. So I think even from that quick index, you can see the breadth and the diversity of the things that Hackett offers.
Yes, incredible. So if this is your kind of thing, and I think if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably your kind of thing.
That's right.
Do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com. Find the books that you want. Drop them in the basket. And if you type in this coupon code, AN2024, Dave, that will get them two wonderful things, which
That's correct. It will get them our gratitude and thanks. And they'll get books too, right?
Yeah, but there's more to it than that.
Oh, so 4 wonderful things.
Yes, exactly.
If they purchase the books, if they put the coupon code in, they'll get the books eventually.
Yes.
They'll have our gratitude, yours ever, as Tom said.
Yes.
But also you get 20% off and free shipping.
Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee, based in Portland, Oregon. Our favorite entrepreneur, Mr. Mark Helweg, has been putting out excellent coffee machines for low on a decade now, perhaps a little bit longer. He started out with Clive Coffee. So Clive Coffee is a little bit of an homage to C.S. Lewis, right?
Oh, yeah.
Clive Staples Lewis. And after selling coffee for a while, Mark realized, there's really no high-quality, affordable countertop machine to take these wonderful grounds and turn them into a delicious finished cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So he invented the Ratio 8, followed by the Ratio 6, and forthcoming is the Ratio 4. Now, Jeff, I see you are sipping this morning. Is that Diet Coke?
Yes.
You started it out at 7:30?
See, do you really have to share this with the listeners?
Yes, I do, because...
Yes. Yes, full disclosure, yes, I am drinking Diet Coke at 7:30 in the morning.
That's all right. Yeah. Do we want to scratch that?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I got an email from kind of a fan this week, a guy named Rob. We gave him a shout out out in California. And the PS said, P.S. Diet Coke is poison.
He's probably right.
I said, no, come on. Yeah. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
Right.
But your typical morning ritual from which you are today taking a vacay is not Diet Coke, but coffee.
Yes, exactly. And I blame my wife this morning. She's off with my youngest son on a fishing trip. And so my rituals were kind of thrown all out of whack.
Right.
And so I'm slumming it.
I know why you're blaming your wife.
Why?
Because she's not here.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So this is an actual fishing trip.
It is.
Okay.
She, with her brother is in town, and they're off on some thing out on Lake Michigan.
But if you can remember, which I'm sure you can you please detail for us a little bit of your morning coffee ritual? Who are the penates caffei, right?
Yes.
The household gods of coffee.
Right.
What goes on?
Well, I come down in the morning. I'm usually the first one up, and I go to my beautiful, sleek, attractive Ratio 8 machine. I put the grounds in my metal cone.
You've got the stainless steel edition.
I do have the stainless steel edition, and then I fill up the tank with the water.
Right.
And then it's very simple. You press the button.
Just one button to press.
One button, and it goes through the stages. You got the bloom.
Okay.
You got the brew.
Is that the Alan Bloom stage?
The Alan, yes.
The closing of the American coffee.
Right. Exactly. Yes. And after the brew comes, it's simply ready. Oh. It's ready to go. And
then you're set.
You're set.
You've got the hulking flag on.
Yeah.
Right? The robust tankard.
Yeah, it keeps it warm for hours. There's no scorch pad underneath. Nothing like that. Right.
None of that BT that we're probably not even going to mention.
No.
So let's say that the listener thinks, I like a good cup of coffee, and for all its faults, I love this podcast. How can I support them? What should they do?
They should go to ratiocoffee.com and take a look at some of their wonderful products. In particular, the Ratio 6 and its older sibling, the Ratio 8. Both of these machines they're great, and they're gonna get you coffee that's better than what you're gonna find at the bagel barn.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, our listeners, if you go to ratiocoffee.com for the first time, you may say, "Well, I love coffee, but these things are a little bit out of my price range." Understandable, and that's why we're really excited to share this Ratio 4.
That's correct.
That is coming out
September,
soon.
October.
Yep.
Yeah. Can I say a few words about it?
Please do.
Okay. So, do you ever wonder what the convenience of a Keurig really costs? Mark says we did too. On average, it is $33 to $50 per pound, depending on the roaster. And what do you get? You get mediocre coffee brewed with haste and waste at the forefront into throwaway plastic pods.
Those marsupods.
I like to call them marsupods,
yes.
Right? There's a little bit of Joey in every sip.
Right.
We offer a better way. Buy fresh from your local roaster and have the 4 brew up a cup the taste will be monumentally better. This is the first affordable and beautiful half-batch pour-over coffee machine, the smallest brewer yet. An agile, sleek machine does not take up too much countertop real estate. Small enough to fit on any countertop at just 11.5 inches tall and 7.5 inches wide. Were I a camper, Jeff, if I were the kind of guy that camped.
You're not a camper?
No, I'm not.
Okay, yeah.
Like Achilles on the plains of Troy, I'm more of a glamper.
You're a glamper, yes.
But if I were a camper and I were to set up a tent in some idyllic locale, I would then have to install within it a countertop.
Yes.
In order to put my ratio there.
Of course, right.
And this is what keeps me out of the wild. It's built to last, backed by a 5-year warranty. It's a little bit smaller, much more attainable as a price point, and it's coming out soon. So we're very excited. I think we're going to give away at least one of these machines, and I'm quite confident this will make Ratio a household name. So, Jeff.
Yes.
Let's say they want to get in early. What do they need to do?
You need to go to ratiocoffee.com. They need to find the products they want, drop them in the basket, and if you use this coupon code, ANCOJ3, this is for the month of July.
Month of July only.
That will get them 15% off their entire order.
That's correct. ANCOJ3. Check it out. All right, Jeff, as we get back into it,
yes.
New Hellenism, the New Hellenism, page 11 and following.
Right. So
tell us what's going on here.
So Richard talks about how there's a shift towards the Greeks.
Okay.
Right. So maybe the early part of the 19th century, education is dominated by the Latin authors. And I think from the list that we were just reading from these various schools, it's Cicero, it's Sallust, it's Virgil.
Yep.
Maybe Homer gets thrown in there. But
some Xenophon, some Greek New Testament.
But there's definitely a focus on Latin and on the Romans. And we start to see a shift in what Richard calls this new Hellenism.
That's right. So what's happening in the 1820s in Greece herself?
Well, you have the fight for independence against the Turks.
That's right.
And you have that, it's kind of synonymous with the rise of the Romantics.
Right.
And so you have guys like Lord Byron, this, English poet who was involved in Greek independence. And you have poets like Keats and Shelley, looking at the crumbling ruins in Rome and Athens and writing these wonderful poems.
Right.
And so you have these political, that romanticism, this kind of this rekindled love for ancient Greece and Rome is a fire underneath which the modern Greeks are seeking their independence against the Ottomans, and all this is happening at the same time.
Yes. So the 1820s, the Greeks are throwing off the Ottoman Empire, an empire based exclusively on putting one's feet up.
Exactly. It's amazing that lasted so long, right?
Exactly. That's leisure for you. And you've got Lord Byron, right? Mm-hmm. Carving his initials into the column at the Temple of Sunion, and then inspiring, as you said, was it Keats?
Keats and Shelley?
Yes, and Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Sure, yes.
Captivating him, says Richard. And then I'm quoting here from page 11. In 1815, at the age of 21, Edward Everett received the Elliott Professorship of Greek Literature at Harvard. After 4 years traveling in Europe, during which he viewed the Elgin Marbles and toured Greece with the aid of a letter of introduction from Lord Byron, Everett returned to the university, that would be Harvard, where he became one of the leaders of the American Hellenist movement. Everett captivated Ralph Waldo Emerson and numerous other students with his remarkably wide-ranging and detailed lectures on Greek literature and culture in a course required of seniors. Emerson recalled, quote, "The rudest undergraduate found a new morning opened to him in the lecture room of Harvard Hall. It was not original thought, but the manner of presentation that created a new perception of Grecian beauty. There was an influence on the young people from Everett's genius, which was almost comparable to that of Pericles of Athens."
Wow, that's high praise.
So it's praise of a professor, right, who was widely toured in Greece, knew the Greek language intimately, and was able to stimulate extensive interest in the undergraduates to whom he lectured. Sounds like a Jeff Winkle, let's be honest.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Yes.
You're welcome.
This is great. What struck me too is, and later in the chapter, Richard talks about this as well, is that travel.
Yes.
And spending time in Europe seems to be, it certainly wasn't open to, all classes and peoples, but it becomes more of a thing for people to almost like go on a grand tour, like a young Roman elite boy would go on before taking up his political career, going to Athens, going to Rome, and touring the ruins. So here you have Everett, who traveled for 4 years,
right, and
even seeing, as it says here, the Elgin marbles, which we did an episode on ways back as well too.
That's true. Yep. They've lost their marbles, I think was the
yes, I think that was the title
that you gave it. Yeah. So the rest of this section of the chapter develops in the ways that the previous section developed, in which Richard examines this principle, the New Hellenism, in a variety of contexts and settings. So in the North, in the South, among women, among African Americans. So if we look down at page 12, about 3/4 of the way down, quote, Everett and Felton successfully implanted the belief in Greek superiority over Rome in the minds of their students. After claiming that many of the Roman Republic's best institutions were borrowed from Greece, Charles Francis Adams wrote in his diary concerning the Greeks, "This was a wonderful people, and the world is more indebted to them than to any mere men it ever produced. They shone through the powers of the mind, while the Romans always shared this superiority more equally with that which came from the body." So that's a long-standing view of the Greeks and the Romans,
yes,
right?
That'd be a good quote to drop on someone who was wondering, why do we bother with the Greeks and the Romans?
Oh,
right,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Right. Charles Francis Adams is the son of
John Quincy.
John Quincy Adams. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So 3 generations of Adamses pursuing the classics, which will lead Carl Richard in I would say, a fairly clever move later in the chapter. Do you remember this? To entitle this section, The Adams Family Values.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I love it, yes.
This is on page 22. Will we ever get there?
No.
Adams Family Values, a case study in classical transmission.
Yes. I mean, we could talk a little bit about that. He talks about how John Adams trying to pass on to his son, John Quincy Adams,
right,
the love of the classics. I love the detail is that JQ was not into it early on. And so his father says, okay, well, instead of studying the classics, I'm going to go have you dig a ditch, right? And in that moment,
tough love,
which apparently Quincy never forgot, he says, okay, maybe in classical there's something to this at the very least, so I don't have to dig ditches.
Yes.
And then he becomes, well, at least Richard kind of shows that he kind of outshines his father.
Absolutely,
in terms
he
of
does.
his love and erudition of the classics.
I went through my own ditch digging stage. Would you like to hear about it?
Please do.
Okay, the year was 1993.
Okay.
I was a 20-year-old, and I went home for the summer from that undergraduate institution, which previously employed the both of us.
Yes.
And that was when I began studying Latin in 1993. And so I was working on the farm all day with my dad, and then in the evening studying Latin and reading literature. And I was kind of torn between my deep intellectual interests and my kind of youthful pride and foolishness about, I don't know, the kinds of things that I was doing on the farm. I felt like I wasn't using my time well.
Yeah.
Turned me into quite an irritable fellow, I must say.
Right.
Not a good combination. But doing lots of hard manual labor all day long, 10, 12-hour days.
Yes.
Developed a lot of self-discipline. But I remember a comment my father made to me at some point during that summer along the lines of, you don't seem like you're really enjoying this, with respect to the manual labor.
Yes. Yeah.
And that made me pause and think. Now, I was so young, I don't know if my attitude improved before the summer ended and I went back to school, but I've reflected on that a lot over the years. And as I look back, I didn't realize how good I had it. Right? So time spent with my dad, time spent outdoors doing that kind of work. That's the perfect balm and antidote to any kind of rigorous intellectual study.
Right.
Because you can't do that all the time.
Right.
So what I should have aspired to is to be kind of like the gentleman farmer, right?
Exactly.
Work hard during the day, study the classics at night.
Right.
But I was too young to really sort that out emotionally.
Do you think if you had been steeped in, like, say, Virgil's Georgics, you would have looked at this differently?
I think it would have helped a lot.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
That's a great point. If I had understood that a person shouldn't try to be just one kind of thing, right? But when you're young, you're trying to figure out, what kind of thing do I want to be?
Right.
As you get older, you realize, well, in different settings, you have to be different kinds of things depending on the requirements of other people.
Right.
and the constraint of the circumstance.
Yeah,
am I making any sense?
You're absolutely making sense, right? I think when I think back to my summer jobs,
right.
which I almost
you probably hated, right? You loathed.
I loathed them, right? And
give us some example.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about my oldest son just started his first kind of part-time job, and so far he comes home and he says, I love it, right? Which I think is great.
It's great.
It's great. I had jobs working on at nurseries, for very kind of low grade farming,
right?
Weeding,
right?
And I loathed it.
Weeding, watering, things like that. Moving trays of seedlings around.
It was more kind of in the dirt on your hands and knees with a little trowel. It was awful.
Yeah.
Right. And
would you go back to it now though if you could?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
Not even temporarily?
No. I mean, I think like, if it was like a family farm, I think that would have been a different kind of thing. But
personal investment.
I had my bosses that I had in my early jobs were, just shy of being sadists.
Okay.
And I hated it. And so, the lesson that I took away from it is that, there's no way I am doing this kind of thing for a living.
That was your ditch digging.
That was my ditch digging, right? And so I never kind of came to this. Like you were saying, kind of this reflection of like, well, if I had been more mature, or had kind of a better view of this and seeing it as a kind of balance, I never really got there.
Okay.
But I loved what you described, this idea. In some ways, the kind of the Virgilian ideal of what you described was a lot more than I think like Virgil himself could say. Virgil. He wasn't a farmer. I don't think so. A lot of these poets, they would idealize the countryside.
You're right.
Right.
Few of them had any direct involvement.
Exactly. But the idea of, like as you say, you can't do the intellectual work all the time.
No.
Richard,
not well, I don't think.
Right. Richard talks about how John Quincy Adams apparently did, and to the degree that it irritated his very intellectual wife.
Yes.
I was like, he's always reading. He's got no time for me. He's always reading Cicero.
Yeah, I can't live without Tacitus and Cicero.
Yes, always has to have it nearby.
Yeah.
But yes, that idea of kind of the balanced life between the city and the countryside. That is an ideal. A literal, I mean, for myself, kind of more metaphorical ideal. As with one of the things I try to do with my own children is to get them away from their screens. Is let's go for a hike.
Good luck with that.
I know. Right?
Do you have a crowbar or something to pry them away?
Let's not go there. But when I do try to do that, let's get out in nature. Let's go to the woods.
Right.
As a kind of that kind of balance. Yes. Apollo and Dionysus.
There you go.
Right.
So going forward, we have in this chapter, the new pedagogy, an important section, the continuing appeal of Rome, pages 17 and following. Then, of course, what we just mentioned, the Addams Family Values.
Yes.
A case study in classical transmission. The Classics in American Society, which is pages 31 and following. And that will end the chapter.
Yeah.
And I think, Jeff, that sad as it is, our time has run out on this particular episode.
We're up against it.
And we have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So I just want to make a little bit of a programming note and get your feedback on it. So some of our loyal listeners, I mean, they're all loyal. We appreciate it. They may be thinking, okay, so they've run, 10, 11 episodes on Mahru, and they're going through that book. Now they have started a multi-parter on another book. Are we really going to go through two books at the same time with, various episodes alternating? I think the answer is yes.
You think the answer is yes?
I think the answer is yes. That's what we're going to do.
Okay.
Because as interesting and entertaining, to me at least, as Mahru is, people need a little bit of variety. So my recommendation would be what my recommendation would be this. If you're really interested in Mahru, then listen to those and wait for the next Mahru episode to come out.
Yeah.
And then occasionally take a break with something else. If you're really interested in the golden age of the classics in America and not in Mahru, then just hang tight because we're going to work our way through this book also.
Yes, indeed. Sounds good to me.
All right.
All right, Dave, we got to get out of here. But before we go, tell us about this Moss method of yours.
Sure. So Charles Melville Moss in the 1890s wrote a little book called A First Greek Reader. There were many of these at the time. I've studied many of them. I think this is one of the best. The Moss method takes you from neophyte to erudite, and you do so by reading actual Greek from the very first lesson. So I'm teaching you forms, paradigms, grammar, constructions, all the typical stuff, but it is not in an isolated fashion. It's not learn a rule, memorize a rule, apply a rule, forget a rule. It's read some Greek and thereby learn how to use the language. So the program I've put together, each module has 40 lessons. These are white screen lessons. You watch a YouTube video, an unlisted YouTube video in which you see how I analyze the reading. Then you complete a homework assignment and you send it to me to grade. And I get that back to you in a quick time. And all of it is designed to make you really proficient in Greek. So I've taken everything I've learned more or less in the last 30 plus years and compressed it down into this course. And the office hours, of course, on Friday, one of Jeff's favorite features. We get together and we read Greek with people from all over the world.
That's very, very cool. And so if people go to mossmethod.com, they can sample some of the free stuff.
That's right.
A lot of free videos so you can kind of see what you're getting into.
That's right.
Yeah, check it out. And you have a similar program for learning Latin.
Yes, and we'll be running a back-to-school sale before too long on both the Greek and the Latin courses. But if you want to study some Latin with me, you want to go ab initio from the get-go, go to latinperdiem.com, latinperdiem.com/LLPSI, and sign up for my course in which I teach you how to read Latin and speak Latin and write Latin using Hans Orberg's fabulous book, Lingua Latina per se illustrata familia Romana. So the approach of the course is you're in the class, but you're not being called on all the time. Instead, you're watching as I teach other students. And these 4 individuals, these are charming, bright, really interesting folks. You learn from their victories, which are numerous, and you learn from their mistakes, which are present. And then you don't have all the pressure of being on the spot, but you get a very similar experience. This course is especially designed for those who are teaching Latin, because you'll get to see what I think is one of the best ways to teach the book, and you can learn from some of my experience. So latinperdiem.com/LLPSI.
Fantastic. And as always, we have people to thank. Mishka, our wonderful engineer, who makes us sound great and turns us around in record time. And what about these musicians?
Yeah, also Mishka puts in sound effects from time to time, like when you had that 50 ways to loaf your loofah. She put in some fireworks last time, which we appreciated. The wonderful musicians, Mr. Ken Tamplin, something like a 5-octave range, plays the guitar, incredibly great producer. He gives us the intro music. He's the composer of that, played the drums on that, played the bass on that, and gives us the bumper music. And Mr. Scott Van Zen, kind of a combination of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eddie Van Halen.
Yes.
He does the tapping, he does the blues. He's a lefty.
Is that right?
Scott's a lefty, but boy, he tears it up.
Just like Hendrix.
That's right.
Yeah.
So these guys have online guitar and vocal courses that you can check out. We're really grateful for their generosity.
Indeed.
And Jeff, what if listeners want to get in touch with us?
If they want to get in touch with us, they want to correct our mistakes.
Oh, my.
If they want to shout out, if they want to just lavish us with praise.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Probably not, but one can hope. You can write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V.
Yep. And what if they want to pop the inflated balloons of our egos?
Well, they can also write to Dave.
Okay. And they can write to Jeff.
Yes.
Jeff at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. There's a V in nauseam. Navseam.
Yep.
You can pick up a Quai No Kent Dokent t-shirt. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This nice Erasmian tag at our website, adnauseam.com. Click on the merchandise tab, the Lurch with Merch, the shop, and pick up a hat, a t-shirt, a mug. Something like that. So, Jeff, what is on tap for episode 156?
Are we TBA? Or,
I think we should be TBA.
TBA, right? So
first it's TBD.
Yes.
To be determined. Then it's TBA.
That's right.
To be announced.
To be announced.
Because we don't know either at this point.
Yes, right. So,
okay.
Well, as some patience from our audience, I'm going on a little vacation up north.
Yes. Okay.
So next episode will be in a couple of weeks.
That's right. Got some guest hosts, some guests, I mean to say, coming up.
Yep.
So some good stuff in store. And I think, Jeff, you have the gustatory parting shot this weekend. It's a double kind of, it's a doublet, isn't it? Because we got some Greek.
Yes.
And we got some English.
Yes, exactly. And this comes from section 404C of Plato's Republic.
Yes.
And Dave, would you read the Greek?
I'd like to.
I'd like
the
translation.
Thank you. Yes, that's a good plan. I'd like to credit Mr. Benjamin Phillips, who is not a shout out, but he sent this in and he says, hey, if you're looking for a gustatory parting shot, you might like this from Plato's Republic. So he tipped us off to Republic 404C. sea. Yeah. Of which the Greek is as follows. Oudamen, heidus maton, hos egoimai, homeros popota emneste.
Which reads in English, where Socrates says this to Glaucon, nor, I believe, does Homer mention sweet desserts anywhere.
Interesting. So nowhere in the Iliad or Odyssey is there one donut, one cruller, one Pop-Tart?
No, I thought that Achilles had, while he was glamping his tent, I thought there was a mention of some Fig Newtons.
Package of ho-hos.
Exactly, but I guess I have that wrong.
All right, thanks for listening.
Thanks.